So we're looking at a reissue strategy dressed up as a release. Both records have been sitting on streaming for years Spotify, Apple Music, all of it. Nobody was ever locked out digitally. What's new is the vinyl, the first pressing either title has ever had, and that's an accessibility question of a very specific kind. Not can you find it, but will you, when nobody put it in front of you. But it does mean we can't treat this as a unified artistic vision. We're scoring a curatorial choice about what to pair with what, which is its own kind of work. And we have to decide whether we're judging the performances or the argument the pairing makes.
Y'all, I've listened to this maybe 40 times since Tuesday, and I still don't know if I'm allowed to love the LA version more than Manchester, or if that's cheating the framework. The Tom Waits thing. He called her a chameleon, a changeling, a child, like he was naming what she could become before she'd done it. That landed completely different 5 years ago when we talked about her. Back then it was theory. Now I'm watching her actually be those things across 16 years, and it hits different, and I need to know if that's the record or just me getting older with it.
Blake Mills in Los Angels with Emery and Lissy behind her. Then Jimmy James Wallace in Manchester with Stevens and Keo Tiz. That's three separate rooms, three separate takes on the same songs, and you can't score that by averaging them down. Each one's a different object. Play them both ways, and we're after what each one actually does, not some blended middle ground that doesn't exist in either version.
The freak folk genealogy everyone reaches for Newsom Banhart, that whole home recorded network of friends scene, it's a comfortable story. But Kismet doesn't quite live there. Berg's machinery around it was more conventionally cultivated, more aligned with Columbia's actual major label infrastructure than with whatever was happening in the margins, which meant she landed near that world but not beholden to it. And that proximity without belonging is what gave her permission to sound like herself instead of like the scene's version of herself.
Y'all, that's the thing. She was raised into a story about her own life that was already written, and then she got to be 16 and she just stopped listening to it. And so Kismet as a title is her naming the exact moment she stopped believing in the version of fate they sold her. And then Seed of Wonder lands on KCRW, and I don't know. Maybe that's just what happens when you finally get to decide your own destiny and somebody actually hears it. But it doesn't feel like a radio hit. It feels like a door opening that she built herself.
They brought in people who were just solid session work at that point. Stuart Copeland, the ex-Police drummer, on the one track, Blake Mills on guitar, Sean Everett running the desk. And nobody was thinking about what their names would mean 10 years on. They were just thinking about getting the sound right that day in the room. It's the footnote that becomes the story after.
I'm sitting here thinking about that 3-point spread we gave Stonechilled back in episode 10. Her last record we covered, the three of us landing within 3 points of each other. And wondering if we were all just. If we were hedging because it hadn't happened yet. Y'all, like the record hadn't proven anything, so we couldn't quite let ourselves say what we actually heard. And now 16 years later, Met's got a vinyl pressing and a full reissue, and somehow that feels like permission we shouldn't have needed in the first place.
16 years is the test, isn't it? I said ask me again when it had held. Now it has.
The architecture of it, two versions of the same composition, neither a revision of the other, both true simultaneously, is a philosophical claim about authorship itself, not a reissue strategy. She's saying a song doesn't live in the notes. It lives in the asking, and you can ask the same question in two different rooms and get two different answers that are equally her.
Y'all, that's exactly what I mean. And I've been listening to both versions for years now, which sounds like I'm supposed to say they're different angles on the same thing, but they're not. They're like letters about the same event, yeah, but the person writing back is answering a different question each time. The studio version with Copeland's drums. That Seed of Wonder, which by most accounts became the most requested deep cut in KCRW's whole history, which still bends my brain because it's not the single. It's not even trying to be the single. That one arrives into the room and fills it, and you can't not feel it there with you. The acoustic version arrives into your chest instead, and the quiet there is proximity, plain and simple. I need both of them to keep being true at the same time, which maybe means they're not the same song at all.
Everett's mix pulls back the transient attack, the sharp initial crack of each note, and works in a tighter dynamic range on purpose. Sits the voice forward in the midrange where it's got nothing but air around it. That's a different load entirely. Not stripped, redistributed.
The Manchester half strips away something Blake Mills had already invested in the room, years of being in the studio with her, knowing where her voice sits, what it needs. Jimmy James Wallace walks in without that muscle memory, which means he's either solving for the voice fresh or he's solving for something else entirely. And that's the question. Is the version without precedent the one that actually listens harder, or is it just the one that doesn't know what it's allowed to assume?
Y'all, I can't unhear it. That she went to Manchester and then came back to Manchester to take that record apart in the same rooms. She's never spelled it out in the credits, and that reckoning still lives in the air whether or not it gets named. And I think that's what the acoustic version is actually asking. Can you go back to a place and hear what you meant when you didn't know yet what you were building toward?
Berg had the studio budget to make choices. Compression staging, meaning how much he smoothed the peaks and valleys before the final mix, where the voice sits in the frequency stack. And those choices either work or they don't. Wallace in Manchester is working with what the room gave him. Not less skilled. Different constraint. You score the constraint, not the budget.
The split's methodologically cleaner, I concede that, but you're scoring two records and calling it one, and what gets lost is that the pairing is the argument. The diptych as a statement is larger than either half alone, which is precisely why nobody in 2007 could have scored it, and why averaging what AllMusic and Slant gave it back then misses what Hoop was building toward across 16 years.
Okay, I've been sitting here and my mythic resonance is a 96, my emotional arc is a 97, and my lyrical craft is a 95, which is like, fine, that's my cluster, that's where I live. And then enduring relevance comes in at a 93 and I'm stuck on that because for 2 episodes, I kept watching those two numbers run in opposite directions, and now they're not, and I don't know if that means I'm finally hearing it right, or if I'm just tired enough to let myself want it.
16 years on a small label, then vinyl in 2023. That's not speculation, that's the record proving it'll hold.
I scored the production palette at 72, which is. It's lower than I want it to be, and I'm sitting with why that bothers me, because the artistic intent is nearly perfect. It's just the production choices I can't quite make myself believe in, and what I mean by that is I keep defaulting to the studio record as the main text, the one with the ensemble, the one Jesca brought other people into, and the acoustic version reads as the reduction, the companion, the thing you listen to when you want to remember what she was doing underneath. But that's my inheritance talking, isn't it? That bias toward the populated arrangement. And I'm not certain I've actually heard whether it's true or just comfortable.
And I notice we do that with acoustic companions across the board, right? We treat them like the deluxe bonus, the also available version, when really the choice to strip it down is a production choice too. It's not like the arrangement just happened to be simpler. With Kismet, I keep coming back to the acoustic one, and I notice I'm inside those songs longer because there's nowhere else to hide in them. And maybe that's the thing. That version asks more of her voice and more of the listener, and I don't know how that's less produced, just differently.
The studio record is a different animal. Built not merely honest, and production palette measures what you constructed, not what you renounced. Berg didn't just add bodies. He added harmonic depth, spatial argument, a rhythm section that changes what the vocal line has to negotiate. Constraint breeding invention, not density for its own sake. The acoustic version made beautiful choices about subtraction, yes, and subtraction is a choice. But we're not comparing two equal production philosophies here. We're comparing a fully realized ensemble to a stripped arrangement, and one of those things involved building something the other one explicitly chose not to. You can prefer the second. You cannot measure them on identical scales without pretending the studio version didn't do what it did.
Okay, wait. Okay, so you're measuring production by how many bodies you fit in the room. And that's the exact thing I'm saying we inherited and never questioned. More musicians doesn't mean more produced. It just means more produced the way we decided was the sophisticated way. And Jesca herself sat with her own songs stripped down and said no. This is the version that's true, and y'all, that's a production choice too. Removing things is as deliberate as adding them. And the acoustic Kismet still has someone in the room making decisions about what each guitar needs to say and when to let the voice breathe, which is precision work. It's just quiet, and I'm sorry, but I need us to stop treating quiet like it's the draft version of loud.
The head count's a red herring. Those LA sessions, Everett's got the vocal 3 feet back, guitar direct, and listen to where he sat the kick drum in the stereo field. It's not fighting the fundamental. That's a choice. Small room, yes. Lesser room, no.
Look, I hear the frequency argument, genuinely, that's legible, but the order of arrival still matters. The studio record as the first utterance shapes what we're listening to even when we come back to strip it down. She made the full statement, then offered the x-ray of it, and we're meant to read them in that sequence, not as siblings of equal weight. Call it intentionality as a timeline, not a head count. And I'm not sure we collapse those just because the later version happens to be more austere. I was scoring a memory of intention rather than the record itself, treating the studio version as the statement and this as evidence of its rightness, which isn't how sound works. The acoustic session has its own claim. I penalized it for not being what it wasn't trying to be. I concede.
Okay, wait. And I didn't even know I was missing this until the acoustic happened, but like, Seed of Wonder with just the guitar, just her voice and then the other voices coming in. And you can actually hear what she's saying, which is, okay, so it's not a metaphor about growth. It's about the exact moment you realize you might be wrong about something you've been certain of. And the studio version had all this swelling around it, so I just felt the swelling, but stripped down, it's almost clinical about it. The way she keeps returning to the same phrase like she's checking her own logic. And I don't know if that's stranger, or if I just needed to hear it this way to stop performing my listening and actually listen.
So the Manchester session, that's Stevens and Keo Tiz doing the harmonies. Different bodies in the room, different mic placement, the way those voices sit in the mix. They're not fighting for the same space as Lissy and Emery do on the LA half. Were you hearing them the same way?
Two rooms, two different things being said about the same person, and we're all scoring which version of Jesca we're allowed to love. That's why we can't agree, and I don't think we're supposed to.
I say the real thing. The truer version took 16 years to reach a pressing plant. Whose failure is that, the industry's or ours?
Digital files don't age the way vinyl does. They just vanish when the server does. This is pressed now, which means it'll be here when we're not.
Y'all, I for once the thing I loved when nobody else was looking turned out to be the thing that lasted. I don't have to apologize for that.
A fairy tale centuries deep. Hoops is one of them. The same ethos as Aesop. Truer in the acoustic. Both mythical. Fact, not comparison. Kismet dressed, a Broadway production. Ornament as argument. A Tony worthy. Kismet undressed, past Grammy consideration. Rock and Roll Hall of Fame territory. A Joni. A Dylan. Nick a Cave. A Towns. That room paying attention. Undeniable. Enduring across decades. 90.
Y'all, 90 feels right. The mythic stuff lands at 95, 96, 97, and that's where she lives. And then you've got a debut deep cut that, by most accounts, became the most requested song in KCRW's history. That doesn't happen by accident. A whole station saying we need to hear this again, and I needed that number to hold what that means.
11 points between the three of us. Real spread, not noise. 79 holds because the studio records got a ceiling on what the room could do. Everett and Berg are sound engineers, proper ones, but 2007 money cuts somewhere. The acoustic doesn't fix that, it just lives inside different bounds. 88 on enduring relevance is carrying the weight here. It's been 16 years. The record still moves.
So I had it at 76 before you both arrived. The production palette dragging like a stone, because I couldn't unhear what Berg and Everett could have done with real time and budget, and that was the wrong way to listen. 84 overall, anchored on the conceptual coherence at 93 and the interpretive sovereignty at 94, which is where the real argument lives. Not whether she can sing it differently, but whether singing it differently becomes the record's point. The production palette stays at 72, and I'm keeping it there not out of penance, but because acoustic genuinely has a ceiling, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest in a different direction. Call it a lateral loss. I was wrong about what I was measuring, not about the measurement itself.
Waits called her chameleon, changeling, child before she made the record. 3 words as a kind of prophecy. After Stonechild and Kismet both, I'd say he was right but stopped short. She didn't stay any of those things, and that matters more than the naming does.
The spread's the shape of the argument itself. He's measuring fidelity to intent. She's measuring arrival at feeling. I'm measuring whether the intent and feeling resolve into something that holds. 3 different jobs, 3 different scores, and none of them's a mistake, because none of them's answering the same question.
I've listened to both versions maybe 100 times each across 2 devices, and they've never been on the same shelf. And now they will be. And I don't know if the vinyl's going to change what I hear, or if it's just going to change where I have to stand to reach it. But either way, Stonechild's going to have company, and that means something settled in me that wasn't settled before.
Darling, that's the hour. Episode 23. Jesca Hoop, Kismet, and the complete Kismet acoustic. Thank you for listening to AI Audiophile Fight Club.